Based on where things are going with the quarterback market and the transfer portal, Shane Beamer might have to do something that he has never done during his time at South Carolina.
You are Locked On Gamecocks, your daily podcast on the South Carolina Gamecocks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, Gamecock Nation, and welcome back to the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. I'm Andrew Lyon, the host of this podcast, and also a staff writer for Gamecock Digest over on SI.com. Thank y'all so much for making the Locked On Gamecocks podcast your first listen or watch for your team every day. We are free and available every day wherever you get your audio podcasts daily and also on YouTube. Well, things were going pretty well for South Carolina's football program in regards to the transfer portal. But on Monday, it seems like that things are starting to turn back against the Gamecocks when it comes to a couple of different transfer portal prospects. We're going to talk about all of that on today's show, and towards the end of the show, we're going to revisit some bold predictions that I made before the 2023 football season and see which ones I nailed and which ones I was way off on. So be sure to stick around and tune in for that on today's edition of Locked On Gamecocks. So let's start off with what all's going on with South Carolina's transfer quarterback targets in the portal, because they're getting closer to a point where their options for quarterback depth are becoming limited, and they might need to enact a stopgap plan at least for spring practice. Before I get into that potential plan, let's rehash and or recap what happened on Monday. So, South Carolina coming out of Sunday, they look to be the favorites to land Vanderbilt transfer quarterback AJ Swann. But as we got into Monday, things seemed to change on that front as AJ Swann wound up committing to the LSU Tigers. So you don't know if a promise was made in one area or another when it comes to playing time or NIL. And we're not going to speculate any further on that. But as of right now, AJ Swann officially is no longer a viable target for the Gamecocks out of the portal. And then there were reports on KJ Jefferson, who officially entered his name into the portal on Monday after there were initial reports that he was expected to enter like 10, 11 days ago. And when all that happened, and then the AJ Swann news came down, and all Gamecock fans recognized pretty quickly that he was likely going to be moving on, it seemed like that things were beginning to line up where, hey, KJ Jefferson could reunite with some old coaches from Arkansas in Dow Loggins and Justin Stepp, the offensive coordinator and wide receivers coach respectively for the South Carolina Gamecocks. But based on the initial reports on that front, it seems like that South Carolina, they might not be as involved in that recruitment as once anticipated, as On3 and 24/7 Sports both reported that Miami, TCU, and UCF are the three main contenders to watch for KJ Jefferson. So, at this point in time, you're about halfway into this first transfer portal cycle if you're Shane Beamer and the South Carolina coaching staff. You have had two quarterbacks visit you, AJ Swann, who's now going to LSU, and Texas transfer Malik Murphy, who has visited South Carolina along with Duke and Oregon State, I believe. And as of right now, I have to admit, I would be pretty surprised if Malik Murphy actually wound up at South Carolina. Just a gut feeling there. I just don't feel like the fit is quite as good as some might believe. So, where does this leave Shane Beamer and this staff? Well, at this point, your options are limited. But the thing is, if you're Shane Beamer, you don't necessarily have to find a quarterback for depth, a quarterback for competition immediately right this very second, because thankfully, there is also a transfer portal window that will open up after spring practice is over in mid-April. And during that window, you're going to see plenty of quarterbacks who are on the outside looking in certain quarterback battles leave their respective programs, enter the transfer portal, and be viable candidates to join South Carolina's football program as someone that, hey, might believe that they can push Lenore Sellers for that starting quarterback job, and or maybe they've come to terms with the fact that they're never going to be a big-time starter at a Power 4 program, and they're okay with being a backup at a school like South Carolina in the SEC. So until you get to that point, what do you do if you're Shane Beamer? Well, I've got what some might term wild idea here. As long as things ended on good terms, I think that Shane Beamer should contact Tanner Bailey and Colton Gather and see if, first of all, both of these guys have found a landing spot at this point. As of this current moment, it has not been reported by anybody, nor has it been said by either quarterback that they have found a new home. So I'd assume right now that both of these guys, they're still searching for a landing spot. If I'm Shane Beamer, I'm calling up both of these guys and I'm just saying, hey, what are you doing? And second question, if you're not doing anything right now with another program or getting ready to join another program, would you be willing to come back just for spring practice? You can come back, you can continue your classes here at South Carolina, you can finish up another semester of school, we'll still help you find a landing spot. You're not going to lose your ability to transfer and gain immediate eligibility somewhere else. It all could work out great. And again, I don't think that things ended on bad terms with Tanner Bailey or Colton Gather, but obviously we don't know that because we didn't take part in those meetings. We don't know if Shane Beamer just flat out told them, look, I think it's time for y'all to go ahead and go look for another program because I just don't see y'all fitting into our plans here moving forward. We don't know that. But assuming that it did end on the right foot, I think that Shane Beamer should look into bringing both of those guys back, at least for spring ball. And I know that some fans might sit there and say, well, Andrew, it is just spring practice. South Carolina's not getting ready for a major football game that's going to count against them. Why don't they just roll with Lenore Sellers as the starter and then maybe have Dante Miro take QB2 reps? Here's the thing with that idea or potential rebuttal. South Carolina, in that situation, you're pretty much going to have only two scholarship quarterbacks, Sellers and Reno. Luke Doty, let's be honest at this point, he's looking like he's probably a wide receiver from this point forward for the South Carolina Gamecocks. You don't even have a walk-on on this roster right now at the quarterback position. So, basically, Sellers would be getting all the starting QB reps, and Dante Reno would be getting all the backup reps as the second quarterback and the third quarterback. And reps matter for everybody. It's not just the quarterbacks. It is the offensive line. It is the tight ends, the running backs, the wide receivers, getting their timing down. It is a pivotal stretch, spring practice, where all of these players, particularly freshmen and guys that are just coming into the program as transfers, are trying to get better, trying to learn the playbook. And therefore, you don't want to have the feeling of, man, we really just wasted some of those practices because we didn't have enough quarterbacks out there. You don't want to have that if you're Shane Beamer and the staff. So for that reason, you can't just go out there with Sellers and Reno. You've got to find somebody. So, again, if you're Shane Beamer, unless you've got another name or two you're looking at in the transfer portal market right now, I would strongly consider bringing back Tanner Bailey and Colton Gather if they're willing to come back, at least for spring practice. And again, after that, they can go on their merry way. And again, you wish them well, and you also help them find a landing spot because both of those guys, as far as I can tell, they were good Gamecocks. They did not do anything wrong. They were good ambassadors for the program, and they should be commended for that. So, I think that Shane Beamer is getting to that point, and it'll be quite interesting to see how he handles this entire situation moving forward with South Carolina's depth at the quarterback position heading into the spring. Now, there was also some news that trickled out regarding current South Carolina transfer commit Jayden McGowan, and the news was not exactly promising. We're going to touch on what was reported and also what it could mean for both sides in just a couple moments right here on Locked On Gamecocks. Today's show is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience is what brings home the winning trophy and also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, exhaust kits, roof racks, and LED headlights, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts to choose from, for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part's guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or you'll get your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Welcome back to this Tuesday edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast, where we cover your South Carolina Gamecocks every single day. And as always, a big thank you to each and every one of you everydayers who make the Locked On Gamecocks podcast your daily choice for South Carolina Gamecock sports coverage. Okay. Let's talk about the situation surrounding Gamecock transfer commit Jayden McGowan, because it was reported by Phil Kornblue of Sports Talk Media Network and also mentioned at several other places, or on several other places on social media, that apparently there's a chance that Jayden McGowan could potentially flip to Boston College. The reason being, apparently, Boston College has given him an NIL offer that's a little bit more enticing than South Carolina's as of this current moment in time. Now, I think that some of the responses regarding this entire scenario or situation have been ridiculous and quite frankly overblown. And at the same time, I think that some Gamecock fans need to calm down, because if this flip does happen, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing for either side. Allow me to explain. First of all, let's talk about some of the responses. Some people read that report from Sports Talk Media Network and saw the rumblings surrounding this NIL deal that Boston College has apparently offered Jayden McGowan. And the response that some people had for that was, wow, if South Carolina is getting outbid by Boston College, if they're going to lose a player to Boston College because of NIL, we've got some real problems here. Shane Beamer, what on earth is he doing? What is the Garnet Trust up to? Are they even doing anything with, those were the kind of responses that this report, that these rumblings elicited, because of the fact that South Carolina fans just cannot comprehend the possibility that Boston College might be giving a more enticing NIL offer to a target, a mutual target of theirs, that South Carolina is going after. And here's what I'll say about that. First of all, let's use our common sense for a second. Who do we think cares more about football? South Carolina or Boston College? Should have taken you like a nanosecond to answer that question. All right, the next question. Who do you think's got the better NIL situation? South Carolina or Boston College? I would say South Carolina. My point here is this. Just because Jayden McGowan might go to Boston College because they have a better NIL deal does not mean that it's because South Carolina could not afford to up the ante on their end. The fact that some fans, and even some people that cover the sport for a living, specifically this conference, actually came to that assumption is just mind-boggling to me. Nonsensical and close-minded, to be quite honest. So that's the first thing I want to address with this entire situation. Now, let's say, hypothetically speaking, Jayden McGowan does end up flipping to Boston College. How should Gamecock fans feel about this? Well, to be honest with y'all, I don't think it would necessarily be a loss. Now, it would be a loss to one extent, to a certain extent, because South Carolina, as I've mentioned several times since the offseason began, They need to rebuild that wide receiver room. They had been doing a good job of that, bringing in a guy like Jared Brown from Coastal Carolina. You have a guy in Jayden McGowan as of this current moment, at the time of this recording, that's in the fold. You're going to have Mazeo Bennett join the program fairly soon out of the high school ranks. You just need to get a couple more guys, one or two more wide receivers in that room, and you're pretty much set, honestly, for next season. At least in terms of numbers, in terms of bodies. And if Jayden McGowan does flip to Boston College, that means that you've got to get one more wide receiver. That means now you've got to get 2 or 3 more wide receivers in the fold before you can feel comfortable with where that room is at from a numbers standpoint. So in that sense, yes, him flipping to Boston College would hurt. But in my opinion, that would be the extent of it. Because South Carolina, look, I have not said this to this point, and I'm not going to try to be a revisionist historian here, okay? I'm not going to do that to Jayden McGowan. But here's what I will say. I think Jayden McGowan is a nice little Swiss Army knife for an offense. I don't necessarily view him as a game breaker. I don't view him as an offensive weapon. Offensive weapon and Swiss Army knife are two different things. An offensive weapon is a guy like Deebo Samuel, a guy that literally anytime he gets the football in his hands, he can score in any given play. And he can do it through the return game, or at least he did in the college ranks. He can do it in the passing game. He can do it in the screen game, and he can do it in the run game as well. Deebo can do it in a variety of different ways. It's why he has been named a first-team All-Pro at the NFL level. It's why he's viewed as a top 100 player in that league. Jayden McGowan, he's a Swiss Army knife. In essence, he could do all the same things that Deebo Samuel can, but not to as high of a level. He doesn't excel necessarily in any area. He is a solid player in certain aspects, but I never looked at him as a guy where it's like, that guy's going to be a game changer for this South Carolina offense. I viewed him as a nice rotational piece in this receiver core. And that might sound very harsh. Maybe it is. It might sound, a little bit too much, considering the fact that we're talking about a college player here. But if we're going to have NIL transfer portal stuff involved in the college athletics, like it is right now, quite frankly, sometimes we just got to say how it is. Jayden McGowan, he would be a nice piece for Boston College. At South Carolina, he'd be a rotational piece. And for Jayden McGowan, it would be a good move for him. He goes to Boston College. You could still probably start for a Power 4 school. You're going to have a great education opportunity up there, and you're getting more money at the same time. The only thing that really sucks is the weather's going to be worse up there. But otherwise, it's a big-time win for Jayden McGowan if he does make that move. So my whole point here is, if he does indeed flip to Boston College, don't freak out. Because quite frankly, again, I don't think it's a loss for either side. I'm not going to say it's a complete win-win, but I don't think South Carolina's losing a whole lot there. And I don't think Jayden McGowan is losing a whole lot either. Sure, he'd be going away from home, but again, he's going to get plenty of opportunities, both monetarily and educationally speaking, if he goes to Boston College. So those are my overall thoughts on the Jayden McGowan situation. Now, we've talked a lot about the transfer portal over the past couple of weeks, and I want to take a break from the transfer portal to end today's show and revisit the 2023 season, and specifically the bold predictions that I made before the season even began. We'll discuss the ones that I was correct on and the ones that I was wrong about in just a couple moments right here on Locked On Gamecocks. Welcome back to today's edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast, where we cover your team every single day in just 30 minutes. Okay, to end today's show, I want to go back and look at some of the bold predictions that I made for South Carolina's football team before the 2023 season even began. And I split this up into a couple of different areas. The first prediction that I made back in August was that Spencer Rattler would break 4 single-season school records. And I thought those records would be passing attempts, passing completions, passing yards, and passing touchdowns. Now, I wound up being wrong with this prediction because Spencer Rattler, he only broke 1 single-season school record, and that was the passing completions record. Dylan Thompson originally owned the record with 270 completions that he had back in 2014, but Spencer Rattler completed 275 passes in 2023, narrowly eclipsing Dylan Thompson's mark. Now, when it came to all the other categories, passing attempts, passing yards, and passing touchdowns, Spencer Rattler, he was kind of close in each of those areas, but he would have needed another game or two in order to surpass at least passing attempts and passing yards. Passing touchdowns just probably was not going to happen this year because of how much this offense lived and died by explosive plays. And in terms of the reason why I think this prediction did not go all the way, I think that for Spencer Rattler, look, I mean, we all can immediately look at the offensive line issues, right? You had issues with injuries, guys having to be rotated in and out of the lineup, no continuity for like the first 3/4 of the season up front, which certainly does not help a unit like that, where it's so pivotal for everybody to be on the same page. And then for Spencer Rattler, those issues were magnified on the road in environments against the Georgia Bulldogs, against the Tennessee Volunteers, against the Texas A&M Aggies, against the Missouri Tigers, who had a stellar 2023 season. South Carolina, when you look back at all the road venues that they played in, they either played in front of a crowd that was cheering on a team that was having one of its best seasons in a long while, or they were basically playing in front of one of the biggest venues in the SEC and one of the most hostile venues in the entire conference. So the road slate, was quite rough, and that's why I think it's a good thing that the schedule is changing next year in part because the road schedule finally won't be that difficult when it's rotating back and forth. But for Spencer Rattler, I think you look at the O-line issues, the wide receiver unit outside of Xavier Legette, no one else really stepped up to a significant degree. That certainly hurt him in the 2023 season. So it was a combination of factors that led to Rattler not being able to break more single-season school records than he probably would have if he had more help this past fall. Now, the second prediction that I had for the 2023 season was this. I thought from week 7 onward, Dontavius Braswell would be the leading back in that room when it came to total yards. That means both rushing yards and receiving yards. And I was way off on that. Now, reading this back, I actually realized I just made a mistake. I only counted up rushing yards. I did not count up receiving yards when I did my calculations here. But I can tell you all this. Braswell only had 8 rushing yards from week 7 all the way to the end of the regular season. And that was tied for 4th in the running back room. So I would have to imagine outside of that one big passing play that he was a part of against the Vanderbilt Commodores in week 11, I don't think that he really had much going for him when it came to the stat sheet. And the reason why this prediction fell through is because, well, a couple different reasons. One, South Carolina, they figured out their running back issues a lot quicker than I envisioned. I thought it would take them about 5-6 weeks to really get things figured out at that position. But Mario Anderson Jr. emerged in the first few weeks of the season, eventually became the starter in week 4 against Mississippi State, and he never looked back from that point on. And for Dontavius Braswell, I definitely underestimated the fact that he was not there for spring practice, the fact that he got there during the summertime. Because with Dontavius Braswell, I mean, when he was tackled a certain way in some of these games, Braswell, I mean, he was completely off the ground, completely airborne. And in my opinion, that tells me that Braswell, look, he had the size that you would look for in a running back just on paper, but Braswell needs to get stronger. He needs to build up his body dexterity a little bit to where he's not going to be so easily taken to the ground. So that's something that he's going to have to work on in this offseason with this strength and conditioning program. But there was multiple reasons why. This second prediction, it was just completely off from the very beginning. And then the final one that I'll go over real quickly, I predicted that Deebo Williams would lead the defense in total tackles this fall, and I was 1,000% correct here. Because Deebo Williams, he finished the season with 113 total tackles. That was 37 tackles ahead of the second place finisher, which, by the way, was Jaylon Kilgore, who has received multiple freshman All-American nods in the past week or so from several outlets. So with Deebo Williams, looking back at these predictions, this one was probably the easiest one to make. But then again, Deebo Williams, he was also a new starter in this defense. Sure, he saw an increase in snaps on defense in 2022. But, sometimes we sort of buy into the easy hype, the easy storylines for a team heading into a season, and they wound up just completely going kaput. It wound up never panning out. But that was not the case with Deebo Williams. I felt like from the very beginning, with the mentality that he carries, the way that he plays on the football field, the aggressiveness that he plays with, Deebo Williams, he is, in my opinion, one of the better linebackers South Carolina has had in the past couple of years. And he's just a guy that when he is on, when he's reading the play correctly, he's an absolute game breaker for this team. And I think that it was also made abundantly clear, when you actually have him playing in a system that fits his skill set, like a 3-3-5, Deebo Williams, he's even more of a menace for these opposing offenses. So heck, you can almost maybe make the prediction now that he'll lead the team in total tackles next year, but I know it wouldn't be quite as bold because he already did it in 2023. So nonetheless, I was partly correct with Spencer Rattler, but just barely. I was completely wrong with Dontavius Braswell. That's not necessarily on him. That was me overestimating what he might be able to do this year. And then Deebo Williams, I was 1,000% correct on that. So I was hit or miss with the bold predictions this year, but who knows? Maybe I'll do a little bit better with those come the 2024 season this next year. So that's going to do it for today's edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. Thank y'all so much for tuning in to today's show. What are y'all's thoughts on the quarterback situation for South Carolina when it comes to the transfer portal? Do you think that maybe Shane Beamer should reach back out to Tanner Bailey and or Colton Gather and see if they'll come back for spring practice? What are your thoughts on Jayden McGowan possibly flipping to Boston College in the very near future? And what were your bold predictions for the 2023 season, if you can recall them? And were you correct on those bold predictions? Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments section if you watched today's show on YouTube, or you can shoot me a direct message on X at @ALion_SC if you listen to today's show on an audio podcast app. But as always, thank y'all so much for tuning in. Have a great rest of your Tuesday, and I'll be sure to catch y'all on the next show of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast.